Welcome to the series What Jesus Meant. Hello, I'm happy to introduce you to the series of biblical messages by Dr.Valson Thampu titled What Jesus Meant. As the title suggests, here's an attempt to unveil the deeper dimensions of Jesus' teachings. But being a Christian is not a requirement for viewing them. Jesus is presented here as the light of the world and not as the icon of a religion. Valson is a voice heard with attention as a teacher, thinker, author, and preacher in Christian and secular contexts in India for over 4 decades. He teaches as one excited about the contemporary relevance of Jesus' spiritual vision. Through these video messages, he offers the fragrance of a fresh understanding of what it means to be Christian. This is a study series without academic rigors. For best results, viewers need to pursue the trail of thought to the end as a learning and unlearning experience. We hope you enjoy.
Welcome yet again to the series of messages based on the teachings of Jesus Christ, titled What Jesus Meant. Today we try to enter a little more deeply into the essential ingredients in the teachings of Jesus Christ. As I pointed to that, let me read a few verses from the 4th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew. And I'm reading from verse 23 onwards, 23 to 25. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering from severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee and Decapolis, Jerusalem and Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. So this is the commencement of the glorious ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I don't have to say this. It's a moment of great excitement for all of us, not just Christians, I believe, every person of good sense everywhere in the world. Now let's begin by taking note of the broad feature of the ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ. It is so basic, but it's often forgotten. The reason why I need to flag this right at the outset. Jesus went to the people. This is so very important for us to know. Jesus went to the people. Because this is contrary to the pattern of the world. In the world, people have to go to those of importance. For example, Herod or Pontius Pilate, if you were to see them, you had to go and visit them and perhaps wait for hours outside, expecting to be called, or sometimes you may not be called, trusting your luck or the good chance that you might be called. So, a person's importance in the worldly sense is consolidated through the difficulty that is added to the process of getting access to his presence. Now, Jesus reverses that completely. Jesus stands the world on its head, and he goes to the people. That's the first thing to be noticed. In contrast to this, Christendom has reversed this pattern. We attach great importance to people going in search of Christian leaders, and the more difficult it is for them to get admittance into their presence, the more important they are. So, I said a short while ago that Jesus reverses the worldly pattern. So let's have some basic idea about how this happens and what Jesus did. As against the worldly idea of keeping ordinary people at a maximum distance, Jesus calls everyone to himself. You read the 28th verse of the 11th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, where Jesus stands and invites everyone, saying, "Come to me, all you labor and are heavy laden. I will give you rest." In fact, the only category of people that people of importance in this, men and women of importance in this world do not want to meet are people who are weary and heavy laden. See, if you are a member of the elite, you can get ready access to the people in power, etc. But if you are really the underclass, if you are suffering, you are deprived, you have no social gloss, then God help you. So Jesus invites people to abide in Him. Now, the eagerness to invite people to abide in Him clearly denotes His keenness to abolish walls of separation, abolish the prestige of physical distance, and also overcome spiritual alienation. And understanding all of this, Paul writes that Jesus, in the letter to Colossians, Jesus dismantled the walls of division. And look at what we have done to the heritage Jesus has left for us. We have fragmented Christendom, leave alone the world. We have made a mincemeat of Christendom, and today Christendom presents a picture of fragmentation, which is the very rejection, outright, unmistakable rejection of the principle of Jesus' public ministry. Now, we must understand why this happens. In order to understand this, let me say that there are only two major shaping principles in the world. If you like a technical word for it, paradigms. There are only two fundamental paradigms in the world. One is power and the other is love. Power is the shaping paradigm of the world. In this world, everything works on the basis of power. The whole world is organized in terms of power. Therefore, the powerful are respected. The powerful enjoy demigod status. The powerful are obeyed, the powerful are respected, and we even assume that the powerful are above the law of the land. They constitute a separate breed of humanity. We are quite unlike them. We can never be like them. They're made of a different metal. So that kind of idea. So power is essentially hierarchical in its genius, and it revels in creating social, cultural, intellectual, philosophical, political distinctions and discriminations. In fact, the members of the charmed circle create the illusion of their superiority by denigrating others. I'm sure my viewers are familiar with many of these things. Therefore, there is no need for me to go into specific illustrations, which would be very time consuming. Now, this is the genius of power. Power alienates, power decides, power plays one against the other. The time-old, time-tested strategy of divide and rule, on which, for example, colonialism functioned. In contrast to that, Jesus introduced the paradigm of love. There are only these two paradigms, these two fundamental forces in the world. Power, in which man revels, God, love through which God expresses himself. God is love. Man is power, God is love. Or rather, man is the delusion of power. No human beings have intrinsic powers. They pretend that they have powers. They borrow powers from the systems that they themselves create. Whereas God expresses himself authentically through love. And it is the nature of love to dismantle walls of alienation, walls of division and fragmentation. Now, the hallmark of the psychology of alienation is that it distrusts and despises those who love. Those who are oriented to power feel unhappy and ill at ease in the presence of those who are oriented to love, which is understandable because these are contrary principles. It's like day and night. If you're oriented to night, for example, if you are an owl, then you are more comfortable at night, and to the extent that you're comfortable at night, you are uncomfortable in daytime. Okay? It's like that. So, the world, because it was orientated on power, it was constructed and driven by power, despises love. And therefore, it is a risky thing to love in this world. Now, it's not just that, the romantic lovers are betrayed by the objects of their love, and many of them die of heartbreaks. It is that love in every form, it is despised, maligned, and in fact even killed by human nature oriented to power in this world. And that is the central message in the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Now, I say this because of a very interesting personal experience. For about 9 years, I headed an institution in higher education in India, one of the most prestigious colleges in India, called St. Stephen's College. I had watched four principals in St. Stephen's before I became principal. And I found that all of them organized themselves in terms of power and the Machiavellian idea. And I don't say this in a negative sense. I mean, Machiavelli, of course, is misunderstood. He's a political philosopher who was very realistic. But people tend to equate Machiavelli with Mephistopheles, with Beelzebub, with devil. That's not the sense in which I'm using. He's someone who wrote a very, very significant work, The Prince, which guided European thought and political strategy, political organization, political philosophy for a very long time. And those of us who have read the book, The Prince, will not think of Machiavelli as merely a diabolic character. He was a practical political philosopher. So I had watched my predecessors ruling the college according to time-tested worldly principles, and I decided that in my tenure I would try out the Christian principle of love. Is it possible to run administration not oriented to power but oriented to love? And I can tell you that there was no end of troubles. In fact, it resulted in anarchy because people are not used to being treated with love and respect. So they see it as an invitation to bring out the very devil from them. I'm not saying that this principle of love should be rejected in Christian administration. I'm only saying that this is a principle contrary to the principle on which everything in this world is organized and administered. And therefore, those who take to the path of love, the narrow, thorny, stony way, as Jesus said, must be ready to suffer in this world. And therefore, without any hesitation, based on the strength of personal experience spread over 9 long years in administration, I can tell you, to love is to suffer. To love is to suffer. And therefore, one important theme that comes to us through the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is this very dictum that I've just now formulated, namely, to love is to suffer. But it's better to love and suffer than to take the path of power and to subjugate people, make them suffer, and in the process you get hollowed out within yourself and you end up as the garbage of history. Many people who strutted their hour on the stage of history ended up as the butt of ridicule, Hitler included. So it is not an option. Power is not an option, unless of course one wants to walk the broad path to everlasting damnation, as Jesus says. Now, one important aspect of the power orientation is distrust. If you are power oriented, you suspect everyone. Don't trust anyone. Suspect everyone. Assume that every other person is out to get you. And therefore, what you do, you remain forever vigilant. Now, in anthropology, especially that section of anthropology which studies the early forms of political organization in human history, which takes up, for example, the rudimentary political organizations among primitive tribal people. You have the idea of a person who, by defeating the mightiest in a tribal group, becomes the king. But the moment he is recognized as king on the strength of the victory that he has achieved, he is overwhelmed by insecurity. You know what he does? He runs and he climbs the tallest tree and stations himself on top of the tree. Because he has become the king by overpowering somebody else. And the same logic will apply to him. So anyone can get him, kill him, and become the king. So power immediately activates a world of anxiety, insecurity, and therefore the psychology of insecurity makes you distrust everyone and see enemies where none exist, and that is how worldly wisdom usually works. Now, at the same time, in the paradigm of love, trust is the necessary investment you have to make in people in order to develop them. The core agenda in the mission of love is to develop people. And you can't do that without trusting them. And trusting them has to be done at risk. To trust is to run risk. But that risk is spiritually legitimate. It has to be incurred if we are in the business of building people, which is the mission of love. Now, distrusting people may reduce your headache, but the head you protect from these aches ceases to be Christian. That is the dilemma that we face. As I said, if you are a Christian, you trust, and trusting makes you vulnerable. It encourages people to try out all kinds of tricks on you, to push you around as much as they can. So it means a lot of headache. So you go to the other extreme, which is to distrust people, and therefore, yes, maybe you reduce the headaches you have to endure, but the head that you protect in this manner ceases to be Christian. So that's the dilemma. So one thing is very clear. Jesus trusted everyone. I'm saying this as an introduction to the public ministry of Jesus Christ. I will not repeat these things because these things are essential and basic and necessarily present at all times throughout the 3 years of Jesus' public ministry. And therefore, it is very essential that right at the outset, I put these things on the table for all of us to be clear about. So, I began by saying that unlike the leaders of the world who expect people to come to them, Jesus goes to the people in order to meet their needs. So, the public ministry of Jesus Christ is characterized by what we call today outreach. And outreach is simply overcoming distance, overcoming alienation. If people cannot come to you, you go to them, right? Very often, I've also worked as a chaplain in a Christian college for about 10 years. And my life among young people has convinced me that more often than not, people with real needs will not come to you because they're embarrassed about it. And many of them do not have the initiative to seek help. They tend to sort of hide themselves in a corner and they hide their problems from everyone. So you have to go in search of them. You have to reach out to them. That's the principle of outreach. And that can only be done in love. It cannot be an exercise in power or authority, etc. So that is the reason why I emphasize again and again outreach as the hallmark of Jesus' public ministry. Now, this has to be done and it has to be emphasized in the world because the world functions on the contrary principle of distance. Outreach is meant to overcome distance or to eliminate distance, whereas the world functions in terms of distance, right? Now, distance is the seed of cultural, technological, scientific pride. See, modern pride is all about distance. For example, telephone, meaning speaking from a distance, right? So, these days, you talk to your neighbors on phone, not telephone but mobile, right? Which is a variation of telephone, means speaking from a distance. Now, for example, the father of, say, let's say, two children is at home, they may not be particularly excited about the father talking to them. Suppose the father goes abroad, goes to a country far away, and after 2 weeks or so, he makes a call from there. And as soon as the children hear the voice of the father from a great distance, they are thrilled with delight. The same father who was with them did not matter very much when he was with them and was talking with them all the time. But now that he's far away, father draped in distance, if you like, becomes a very special category. That's how human nature works. Now, extrapolate this to modern warfare. The greatest pride in modern warfare is waging war from a distance. Now, I'm doing this video in the context of the Ukraine-Russia war. Now, the significant development in this war is that for the first time in a war, drones became the decisive factor. Surprisingly, it's not the powerful missiles, but these humble, lowly, small drones that are making all the difference. I mean, the old pride of military hardware like tanks and artillery and all that, they still play a role, but somehow warfare from a distance has captured human imagination, and this is going to revolutionize war strategies and, in fact, the military industry in the days ahead. And this will be a very, very clear consequence of the Russo-Ukraine regrettable, absolutely insane, senseless war raging at the present time. The same thing you find in modern globalization, which is a variant of the old globalization. In olden days, if one people wanted to colonize another people, they had to go to their midst, conquer them, stay in their midst, then dominate them, and maybe economically exploit them and all the rest of it. Now you don't have to do it. You can colonize a people from a distance. So distance is the pride of modern times, whereas of the world in our times, whereas overcoming distance is the hallmark of Jesus' ministry. These things have to be clearly kept in our minds, because very often, for want of clarity regarding these fundamentals, we end up completely confused, and therefore distance becomes the pride in Christendom also. For example, if you have a wise man in your neighborhood who can teach you the fundamental truths of the deep meanings of the teachings of Jesus Christ, you will not value him. You will not even listen to him. But if somebody comes from a great distance in a faraway country, then people will flock to him. The same psychology of taking pride in distance. Whereas distance hurts. Distance is our famine. Distance is our bankruptcy. It is togetherness, it is oneness that we need, and that is the wealth, the riches that Jesus tries to impart through his public ministry. And that's also the main idea in incarnation, God becoming man and dwelling in our midst. As John says in his Gospel, chapter 1, verse 14, the Word became flesh and dwelt in our midst, full of grace and truth. That is the overcoming, God's initiative in overcoming distance between God and humanity. So this is the hallmark of the spiritual mission. If we don't understand this, we don't understand anything at all about the ministry, about the teachings and mission of Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, religion as religion, all religions, no religion is an exception to this. All religions sanctify and institutionalize distance. Religion, unlike spirituality, is a domain of alienation. And that distance we can classify into two broad categories: the distance or the alienation between religions, or what is called interreligious chasm, interreligious gulf, interreligious alienation. That's one category. The second category, which to me is even more serious, intra-religious alienation or chasm. That is, the alienation within the same religion. For example, Christendom is fragmented into thousands of churches, and each church exists as a vertical silo, which has nothing to do with any other denomination. And yet all churches claim to be the body of Jesus Christ. I don't know how this grammar or this calculation or this geometry works out. I have no idea. But this is what is claimed routinely, glibly, unthinkingly. We have nothing to do with fellow Christians in other churches, but we are all in the body of Jesus Christ. Okay, let that be. Now, I've said so far something by way of introducing the public ministry of Jesus Christ. I noticed that it's already 24 minutes, so I will not be able to cover everything that I want to say about the essential features of the public ministry of Jesus Christ. Maybe we'll have to continue this into another session, which is all right. So now let's get started. The introductory part is now over, and I hope what I have said by way of introduction remains clear in our memory, so that that constitutes the background to all that we are hoping to be able to share from now onwards. Now, the three essential ingredients in the public ministry of Jesus Christ can be very simply and readily mentioned. Two of them are very prominent in this, the other is not, but I need to mention all three. It's a kind of triangle, if you like. The public ministry of Jesus Christ is easily portrayed in the form of a triangle. Let's put it very simply. Jesus taught, Jesus healed, Jesus suffered. Three things. Jesus taught, Jesus healed, Jesus suffered. This text, the text that I read out to you at the beginning, focuses mainly on, or rather exclusively on, two aspects, namely he taught, he healed. And therefore, in the present video, I'll say only something about these two aspects, and the reflections on the third aspect, which is the very heart of the gospel, will be deferred to a future occasion. So this text says not that Jesus preached. The word used is that Jesus taught and proclaimed. It's very important. To me, the word teach is so vitally important. Maybe because I was a teacher in higher education or lifelong, and therefore this word means a great deal. It means the whole world to me. And therefore, please forgive me if I sound a little too excited and enthusiastic about the scope and reach of this word. So let's begin by asking, what does it mean to teach? And how does it differ from preaching as is performed? Preaching, and I'm using my word, I'm choosing my words carefully, preaching as it is performed in our times. As I just now mentioned, I've been a Christian, a priest, situated in the domain of higher education for over 4 decades. So I speak from very immediate and extensive personal experience. I'm not dealing with what Shakespeare calls bookish theoric, that is, theory derived from books. I'm speaking from first hand or hands-on experience of 4 decades in one of the most powerful sectors of public life in India, certainly in India. Now, from my experience, I have to say the teaching is quite different from the warehousing of information, though that is how teaching is understood in this country, unfortunately. No one associates a teacher with two things. One, no one expects a teacher to produce original knowledge. A teacher is not a producer of knowledge or insights. A teacher is simply a distributor, a broadcaster. By the way, broadcast is a metaphor from farming. It actually, pardon me, it actually relates to how the farmer scatters the seed, broadcast, casting abroad, broadcast. Today we associate broadcasting only with media activities. That's why I'm saying that the original metaphor is not from the media world. The media borrowed it from agriculture. Broadcasting means scattering abroad. So the teaching is not just the broadcasting or scattering or sharing or warehousing of knowledge produced by others as it is understood today. I said a while ago that teachers today limit themselves entirely to this. No one expects a teacher to be a producer of knowledge. I'm not quarreling with it, I'm just stating a fact. The second thing that people do not associate, unfortunately, do not associate with teachers nowadays is that no teacher is really expected to bring about a change in the personality of the student. Unfortunately, this is a new development. When I was a student some 60 years ago, there were a few teachers who understood that a teacher is someone more than a mere provider of information to a student. He also played a role in character formation. Today, of course, character formation exists as a stated goal in the theories on education, but it is the most neglected area in the practice of education, particularly at the level of higher education. So, the third thing that I have to say about education, and this surprisingly is true also about higher education in this country, is that teachers are really not expected to challenge students to think. The scope of the work that the teacher does, or any teacher does, is by common consent restricted to preparing students to write university examinations. You think of it. So here, a student does not have to be trained to think. A student has to be trained or enabled to master a certain quantity of knowledge or information and then to reproduce it as faithfully as he or she can in the examination hall. So the idea of training young minds to think is somewhat alien to higher education in this country. This may not be equally true in other countries, but I have to say this based on my experience that this is certainly true in India. And in fact, my experience as someone who tried to challenge my students to think rather than prepare themselves for examination was that a certain section of every batch of students, I thought, began to feel disappointed that I was not training them specifically to write examinations. I was taking them all over the world, across disciplines, saying this and the other, and they were not able to connect to the examination process because, you see, students are very, very practical these days. They're very utilitarian. You know what they do? They go to the library where past year's question papers are kept ready for reference. So they are quite aware of what kind of questions are asked vis-a-vis every text. And when students find that you're not really dealing with those texts with specific and restricted reference to those examination questions which are wrangling in their minds, they feel a bit disappointed. Is this teacher wasting my time? That's been my experience. So that's why I'm saying that the whole system of higher education in this country is not geared to challenging people to think. Whereas, and why I'm saying all this is that this will help us to understand what is unique in the life of Jesus as the teacher of teachers. Now, as I said, teachers, if they do not believe in challenging or training young people to think, they knowingly or unknowingly limit themselves to, transacting in stereotypes, patterns of knowledge as they exist, and train young minds only to conform to the status quo. And therefore, though in theory education is aimed at social transformation and personal transformation, personality development, in point of fact, the net result of the practice of education in this country, in India, and in most countries in the world, I'm sure, is that only those who are the servants of and the custodians of the status quo are produced through the modern practice of education. And this is my experience, and I'm willing to be challenged and contested. If anyone believes to the contrary, I shall be happy that something different exists. All right. So therefore, when Jesus taught, let's be very clear about it. Jesus taught, he taught in order to challenge people to think afresh. And this is something that Christians have long forgotten. Christians today have come to the kind of suicidal assumption that thinking is dangerous and it is inhospitable to the religious life. It's harmful. Blind faith is what secures a safe passage to heaven. Now, if you have even a nodding acquaintance with the teachings of Jesus Christ and how Jesus taught, you will realize this to be utterly untrue. Nothing can be farther from the truth than this. Jesus taught in order to challenge people to think afresh. Therefore, he questioned, he interrogated every reigning stereotype of his times, particularly religious stereotypes. And why did he do so? He didn't do so simply because he was a rebel. He did so as a necessary process in order to bring about changes. Jesus understood what philosophers understood later, that if changes are to happen in this world, that change must begin within human beings. It's only when thinking changes that changes in the external world happen. And that was the scope and purpose of Jesus' teaching, and that was the reason why Jesus prioritized teaching. And therefore, Jesus was a spiritual teacher. He was not a secular academic professional teacher. Jesus didn't teach to earn his livelihood. Jesus taught in order to bring about an inner change, transformation. And that's the heart of Jesus's ministry of teaching. Now, there's a huge difference between Jesus' approach to mediating changes and the idea of bringing about change in the world. The world also believes in changes. The world knows that changes have to be brought about. But there is a radical difference in the two approaches to effecting changes. The world, when it really wants to bring about changes, adopts an external approach. It believes that systems have to be changed and reformed, but it neglects the need to change individuals. After all, individuals work these systems, and to the extent that individuals remain anchored in their old self, these new systems collapse. And this is the sad story repeated ad nauseum in the history of Reformation and renewal, so on and so forth, reform, anywhere in the world. All reforms come to grief because human beings who are to work these reform systems remain unreformed. And therefore, gradually, the very foundation of reform is eroded and everything is hijacked and taken back to the old crude state. And this happens both in politics and in religion. And in course of time, I hope to give you illustrations after illustrations to point out this very important a historical pattern which we cannot afford to overlook. So, let's therefore clearly register in our minds that Jesus did not preach, he taught. And he taught because teaching, according to him, is the only way to bring about internal changes, which should then impact the world around and bring about enduring, meaningful changes. And that's the spiritual way, whereas the world's way is the exact opposite of that. It believes that the systems and structures in the world outside should change, and that change would then spread to individuals, and individuals would then be transformed, which is simply not true. It has never happened in history, and therefore I believe that the strategy of Jesus Christ is the only strategy that works, and Christians need to proclaim this at the top of their voice throughout the world. So, now I've indicated some very, very broad features, some essential ingredients in the teachings of Jesus Christ. I mean, Jesus as the teacher, what is the heart of the matter? Why did he teach? Why did he prioritize in teaching? What is his idea of teaching? What is the emphasis he laid on the importance of thinking anew? Why did he do so? Why did he challenge the stereotypes by way of proclaiming the kingdom of God? We should have some basic idea, some working knowledge about these things before we enter into specific analysis of individual teachings. And I'm just offering these thoughts at this stage merely as introductory to the major work that we are about to accomplish. For want of time today, I'm not taking up the second part, the second aspect of Jesus' public ministry, which is that he healed, the healing ministry of Jesus Christ, about which also great misconceptions exist and they multiply in our times, and therefore it is very necessary for us to acquire clear and biblically, scripturally correct understanding of what it means to be, what it means to believe in the healing ministry that Jesus Christ practiced, as against the healing ministries that are rampant, healing enterprises that are rampant in our times. More of that in the next unit. I wish to thank all of you for taking a sustained interest in this quest to understand the deeper meanings of the teachings of Jesus Christ, the living Word. Have a great day ahead.